Artificial intelligence is the future. Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world. Guess who said that? Okay, never mind. I'll give you the answer. It was Vladimir Putin, Russian president for life, the neo-tzar, waging a terrible war of conquest against Ukraine. Now, Putin is evil, but he's not stupid. He's not unintelligent, certainly not when it comes to artificial intelligence. Americans don't want to rule the world, but neither do most of us want the world to be ruled from Moscow, Tehran, or Beijing. So we have to get smart. We have to run an arms race, or maybe I should say a brains race. What will that require? Matt Pottinger, former Deputy National Security Advisor at the White House, currently chairman of the China program here at FDD, published an essay on that topic in the Wall Street Journal a few days ago. His co-author was Dario Amodei, CEO and a co-founder of Anthropic, which makes the AI system Claude. I have no idea what Anthropic does or who Claude is, but Matt is with us today, so maybe he can explain. Also joining us, retired Admiral Mark Montgomery, who serves as Senior Director of FDD's Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation. I'm Cliff May. I'm pleased you're smart enough to be with us too, here on Foreign Policy. Well, welcome and good to see you both.
Cliff, it's great to see you.
Good to see you.
I want to start as simply as possible. I mean, I'm old enough to remember my first handheld calculator from Texas Instruments. It can do multiplication and division and percentages. Wow, now that's smart. So is AI just an extension of that kind of technology, or is it something quite different?
It's something quite different. It's a qualitative shift that some people that I've been talking to, some who are involved in helping develop it, but even people who are actually not involved in developing it and are actually quite concerned about many of the implications of AI, agree that this may end up being this decade, the biggest technological breakthrough in human history, potentially. Something that at least would rival the printing press, the internet, electricity. And that is and there's a lot of disagreement about what would constitute what people call artificial general intelligence, right? That we as human beings have general intelligence. It's not just that we're automatons that can respond faster than people on things that we've been programmed to respond to, but something that begins to develop something like a self-awareness. Even if those are exaggerated views, we're already seeing existing AI start to take on pretty incredible capabilities. Dario, who you mentioned, who's co-founder of Anthropic, he had worked at OpenAI before that. You've heard of ChatGPT, right? So
you use ChatGPT myself. That far along I am. It's like having a research assistant who doesn't go out on dates on Saturday night, so you can information whenever you want.
That's right. So Claude is a competing one that has certain strengths and disadvantages, but they're right up there. Vis-a-vis ChatGPT, Claude is not connected, or the part that's available to us is not connected directly to the internet the way that ChatGPT is. But the quality of the responses are quite shocking. Actually. In my view, even more fluent and sort of natural, like you're talking to a person. And so these things are, and by the way, there's already signs with existing models, AI models of some of these things that should have us thinking about how disruptive this is really going to be. For example, the AI is now able to do the things that a person working remotely from home could do, right? It can use a mouse. It can search the internet. It can take a very complex task and sequentially work its way through towards an ultimate answer. So it's not just responding to one question. So Dario, the way that he puts it is that we're just a couple of years out, most likely a couple of years out from the point where most AI will be smarter than most people, at most things. Okay. What I should say, the frontier AI, the really cutting edge AI done in frontier labs. It's like, you're having a whole fleet of Nobel laureates in their respective fields working on really complex problems, and you can multiply them by however much computing power you have, so that in Dario's word, it's imagine a country of geniuses contained in a data center. And so this is it's not an exaggeration to say what Vladimir Putin said in that quote you just gave, which is that whoever dominates artificial intelligence, it's going to be an advantage that might be insurmountable for any other nation or collection of nations.
There's a lot to unpack here, but just one more thing before we do, and that, just so I understand, is it collecting information and processing it in some way, or is it thinking on a higher level? And is it learning and getting better because engineers and computer scientists are adding, I don't know, various codes, or is it learning on its own at this point, apart from any computer scientists who are working on this?
Well, when we cross that threshold, and again, there's debate about the timing or even how to define the threshold, but generally speaking, it would be able to learn on its own the way that humans, in some ways faster than humans are able to learn, because it will have at its disposal the whole compendium of all human knowledge. So you remember going all the way back to like Deep Blue, right? Which was able to win Jeopardy and then chess matches against the world's greatest chess players. That was not general intelligence. That was stuff that was programmed and built based on a limited data set, but it's still a pretty impressive one. All the chess games that had ever been played, so that it was able to do a fairly narrow task, but to do it better than humans. We're way beyond that now. We're moving towards a phase where there'll be debate about whether it takes on certain attributes of consciousness, wanting to protect itself, showing signs of deception, but also all the good things that come with that, breakthroughs in some of the hardest material science or physics problems, or, figuring out, all the secrets of the universe and dark matter. Why is the universe accelerating when theoretical models would have suggested that it should be cooling and slowing? And then of course all the medical breakthroughs that could come through that. So it's a double-edged sword, but it is the biggest sword and sharpest sword that any of us are going to have seen in our lifetimes.
And Monty, give some of your thoughts on all this. I know you've pondered this for a long time.
I share Matt's, both optimism, about the opportunity that's there, and I'm sure he shares a little bit of my security concern about what could happen in the wrong hands, and so I think it's this balance. And from my point of view, what I'm most concerned about, first of all, I agree completely. The opportunity there. I mean, this is like all the Nobel laureates in a data center, and they don't hate each other, right? I mean, which is and they'll work together. I mean, you can really see some unbelievable opportunity, but there is risk here, and the risk isn't. And we have to be very careful when we talk about this risk, because I'm not arguing here for a strong regulatory regime, but I do think we have to have strong security standards at what Matt was calling the frontier labs, the lead labs, particularly about their model weights, the kind of intellectual property that drives the knowledge development of their AI model. And it needs to have both physical and cyber security at the same level that we would give one of our nuclear weapons labs, like Lawrence Livermore or Los Alamos. And why do we do that at Lawrence Livermore and Los Alamos? We worry a little bit about an adversary, but we really don't want a bad guy, someone with nefarious intentions, grabbing some of those plutonium or whatever. So you have to have that same kind of physical and cybersecurity around those model weights. And so one of the things I'm looking for is to not handcuff these foundational, these frontier labs, but at the same time make sure that they're secure, so that in this case, our adversary is looking for him. If you want to know how China, Matt's about to describe a very effective export control regime that started with President Trump and has continued with President Biden and hopefully continues again this weekend, that has limited China's ability to leapfrog us. But if they somehow could steal some of that technology, that to me, that's the one way. It's harder than it sounds. It's not like grabbing the drawings of an F-35. It's more complex than that. But I want to keep adversaries out, and I want to keep bad guys out, and I want to keep them out physically, and I want to keep them out cybersecurity-wise. So from my point of view, that's my one, Appendix A to this discussion.
So let me, when we talk about adversaries, I want to be clear on this. My impression, tell me if I'm wrong, is that as much as Putin recognizes how important and powerful this is, Russia is not going to be a competitor with us, not least because a lot of the smartest Russians have been getting out of the country. But I could be wrong about this, so you tell me. My guess is that Tehran, awful as they are, they don't have the kind of brain power to be ahead of us on AI. And North Korea, again, they're very good at stealing information. They're very good at hacking, but probably don't. So what I'm suggesting is that the real competitor and the only real competitor is Beijing, is the Communist Party of China. Am I wrong on that or not?
No, I think that's right. China is really the one that is striving the hardest and has the ingredients in place to really be a formidable threat. And we'll talk a little bit about in a second about what the U.S. strategy should be to ensure that we win, because part of it is the old adage of running faster than China. But we're now in a Beijing has shown its hand. It wants to win the competition globally against democracies. I mean, Xi Jinping said in a major address that was just declassified on New Year's Day this year, he talks 18 or 19 times. He talks about this great struggle against the West. He talks about how the West is falling and China, the East is rising. He talks about how the way to describe the new era that we've come into is one of China being stable and the West being in chaos. And so that is part of his strategy, is to further foment that chaos outside of his borders. And so when you say, Russia's not going to be the one that beats us to the punch, I caveat that by saying that whatever China achieves will be in large measure at the disposal of the other Axis members. Just like China right now is the arsenal of autocracy, they're the ones that are providing everything from the drones to the components and chips and explosives material and fuel that go into the missiles, rockets, and other things that are being used to kill Europeans inside of Ukraine right now. AI will be put at the service of this axis, this totalitarian axis. So, we shouldn't feel a sense of consolation that it's Xi Jinping who beats us to the punch and not Vladimir Putin.
Right.
Now,
yeah, I know, and just this bit of context for anybody listening or watching who may not know this, and it's not a shout out. I just want to make it clear: you are more responsible than anybody else for understanding, documenting, and persuading those in the foreign policy community that the great experiment we thought we had with the People's Republic of China had failed. By what that I mean that in 2001, gave China most favored nation status, brought them into the WTO. The experiment was, if we make them wealthy, they'll become liberal, moderate, good stakeholders in an international order in which America leads. You realize, because you scrape the speeches and the documents, that's not what they're thinking at all. And we still have, in the Biden administration, plenty of other places, this idea, it's a pacing challenge. It's just, they're a competitor. It's kind of like the Olympics. May the best system win. It's not really a problem. We can cooperate. John Kerry can go and talk to them about climate change, and we'll work with them on that. I'm sure they understand it too. No, that's not what's going on. What's going on is, and you've said this, there's a Cold War being waged. It's being waged by the People's Republic of China We may not understand it, but we may not accept it, but it's still being waged, whether we fight it or not. And very importantly, very important, FCD, People's Republic of China, Beijing, is an axis of aggressors with Moscow, with Tehran, with Pyongyang, and they're bringing in others as well through various agreements, South Africa, Cuba, Venezuela. This is the Cold War that is underway. We're just not mobilized to fight it. And this important point, there is no more important way that it has to be fought than this arms race, this brains race over AI, because this gets us to the next thing. We can talk about how it's wonderful for understanding the universe and the birth and dark holes and medicine, and that's all true. But, and I'll go to Mark for a second on this, it's also hugely consequential in terms of armed conflict and the weapons that can be and will be invented and devised with artificial intelligence. Is that correct, Mark?
Oh, definitely. I do want to add, of course, I'm worried about Greenland. Wait a minute, that's a different discussion. Look, fair. Look, first, I want to stipulate Matt had it exactly right, and he's right to draw this to the axis of authoritarians in the sense that China will share this, because the value in China is not usually the user, right? They're very good at having someone else, do their work for them. So, providing these tools to Russia and Iran will be easy for them. You're absolutely right. I'm in a group that's looking very hard at the military, how the military can properly take on artificial intelligence and integrate it into our warfighting. And the answer is there's so many options. It's hard to control. It's hard to control your imagination. But I'll say, most importantly, the ability to seamlessly integrate a wide swath of weapons over a distributed architecture, when you're losing, satellite communications, all these other things, you want smart, self-guiding weapon systems out there. It's a really tricky thing for us because we can see the opportunity, but then we also see the risk. There's risk in these AI weapons, and there's risk in how much autonomy you give them for like target selection and such. And we've seen very basic use of artificial intelligence by U.S. targeteers and by Israeli targeteers over the last 3 to 4 years, and so how we integrate this properly so that we get the maximum effectiveness of the tool while still maintaining our ethical control over the weapon systems is going to be a really interesting challenge for our military. But I'll tell you, the one thing that's worse than having to think through this challenge is having to respond to this challenge if China had them first. So Right. It's absolutely essential for us to as Matt's article lays out very clearly, his op-ed lays out very clearly, the United States needs to stay in front of the pack. It needs to stay, and not by 1, 2, or 3 years, but by multiple, by 5 to 10 years, as the AMSL CEO discussed, we need to stay ahead of them by that much, because as a democracy, it takes us longer to integrate these weapon systems than it'll take an autocracy.
Okay, so that gets, Matt, to your main point, which is that the incoming Trump administration needs to take steps to ensure that the U.S. has the lead, we do now, I believe, keeps the lead and doesn't let China take the lead in this. And you're coming up, I think that's correct. And then you talk about what specifically this new administration is going to have to do if it understands that this is not a competition we can afford to lose.
Exactly right. So look, there are going to be all kinds of challenges when artificial general intelligence arrives. Do we want those norms and usage cases to be determined by totalitarian governments, or do we want to be the ones who pioneer this so that you have rule of law societies with democratic oversight that wrestle transparently with these kinds of issues? That is why I think it is imperative that we win that race. Now, what does it take to win the race at the frontier for the superior AI models? It's really 3 big ingredients that go into this, right? You have massive amounts of data, and the engineers who build the models for processing that data, well, China has access to data too. They steal our data, and there are no privacy concerns inside of China. So they have, and by the way, they don't allow their data to be exported outside of the country. Xi Jinping has very strict laws on that. So in some ways, we're equal on that front. They have very good engineering talent in China, much of it trained in the United States and in U.S. companies who go back to serve the Chinese Communist Party. The second ingredient is electricity. It's power. It's energy. And you need huge amounts of energy to push through these large computer stacks, right? These massive data centers to test and train and build the models to store, but then use this data through a system of weightings and models to arrive at a practically usable artificial intelligence. Well, the U.S. doesn't have a special advantage in power. In fact, power is expensive in the United States. We don't burn filthy sulfur-filled coal, for example. China is burning more coal than ever. Every year they're burning more coal. They don't care about what that means for climate change or even for the air that you breathe, in downtown major cities in China. So we don't really have the advantage there. Our advantage is in the third ingredient, our primary advantage, and that is that the United States designs and assembles the most powerful computers, the chips. And sometimes it's funny to use the word chips because these things, look like they're bigger than car batteries, right? These are these sort of heavy units that are used to actually do, almost to be like the neurons in a giant neural network, in a giant brain that is, runs on a lot of power. And we have an unmistakable lead in those chips. Now, the company that people are most familiar with is NVIDIA, right? Sometimes it's been the most valuable company in America. It's always sort of in the top three. That company makes far and away the most advanced chips, which are the ones that American frontier models are being trained on for AI. These are the chips that China is desperately trying to get their hands on. But fortunately, starting under President Trump's term in 2020, he made it much harder for China to acquire certain chips, or at least Huawei to attain certain chips, but also more importantly, the Trump administration made it harder for China to acquire the most advanced equipment for making advanced chips. And the company that makes some of those tools, or the most advanced tool in the world, is actually a Dutch company called ASML. It makes an extreme UV light machine that can etch the most advanced chips in the world, including these AI dependent chips. So what President Biden's team has done has been to expand on President Trump's rulings. And we're going to find out probably this weekend or sometime soon after that what the final rules are that the Biden administration is going to make public before it leaves office in just 10 days. And those rules are designed to make it even harder for China to access really advanced data centers and the chips that go into those data centers to train their models.
Okay, I got just a few questions that I want to make sure people understand, and I have to make sure I understand. One, the Dutch company you talk about, they understand. Do they understand, and are they cooperating with the U.S. that they don't want China to have their technologies or utilize it? They won't sell to them. They're good about cybersecurity, so it can't be stolen from them. Are they part of a Western alliance that is willing to stand up to the?
What I would say is that ASML is a law-abiding company. It has compliance shops, and they will follow the laws that they're required to follow and the regulatory regimes that they're required to follow. If they were left to their own devices, my guess would be that they would be like any other company that exists for its benefit, but not for the benefit of its societies at large. And they would be selling this stuff to the Chinese. I think they would be, because I know that they were not thrilled with the fact that the Dutch government has not given them licenses to export some of their stuff. So this is why you have governments, and we're not run by oligopolies, right, or oligarchies. You need to have democratic representative governance put some restraints sometimes on business for the sake of the whole. And so ASML is following those laws. China is not able to get a hold of the most advanced tools. They're able to get earlier generation tools from ASML that are also very valuable for China, but not as valuable. And so what's left is, what do you do with the chips now that the United States is producing, obviously with really critical input from Taiwan's leading chip manufacturer, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corp, creates a handful of what are the most valuable secret ingredients that go into those NVIDIA GPUs that are these chips that are used to train AI. What the Biden administration is doing is imposing rules to make it harder for China to access those chips or the data centers that have those chips around the world.
All right, two more quick questions. Just so we know that Taiwan makes some of the most sophisticated chips, different kind of chips, though I think a little bit in the world. As Beijing, as Xi Jinping thinks about how he wants to take over Taiwan, he has to think, do I want to keep this chip manufacturing, the special set of skills and abilities they have there? Do I want to take that over myself? I want to be careful not to bomb it. Does he think once we get rid of it, everybody is rid of it, and we can start from scratch, and that's okay? In other words, I guess I'm asking, how does Xi Jinping think about Taiwan within this context? And Mark, you might have some thoughts on them.
Do you want to start rather, and then I'll
so look, this is why, when Matt and I and Craig Singleton, our China director, think about Taiwan, we recognize the U.S. military needs to plan for cross-strait invasions, missiles attacks, and submarine blockades and all that, and a kinetic war. But Xi Jinping's his theory of victory in Taiwan is to win it through a pressure campaign where there's no damage to Taiwan, to TSMC, the company Matt mentioned. In other words, this is why TSMC is of no value with seven DF-26 weapons wedged in it, exploded, right? It's a value as is. Now look, I also say you can't just take over Taiwan and have control of Taiwan and have all the TSMC working the way it functions today. Taiwan has been very careful with this. They've put secondary and tertiary suppliers in the West. They have, ASML has to update these beautiful, as President Trump would say, these beautiful, large, $250 million each, maybe $150 to $250 million pieces of gear that make the 3, 5, 7 nanometer chips, the really small ones we're talking about. They have to have software updates done to them every few months that have to come from the Netherlands, from the engineers there. So TSMC is now an environment. It's an infrastructure spread throughout the world. So, first of all, Xi doesn't want to take it violently. Second, he's got to take it in a way that TSMC continues to operate as it functions today, and that's a very complex thing. So, I give Taiwan a lot of credit. I want them to. They spend a lot on defense. I want them to spend more. But what they've really done is made themselves, the indispensable technological ally and partner to the United States and the West with TSMC. So I just want to say that, this is not something you can, quote, capture in a military action. It's something that you would have to integrate very carefully into your economy if you're China.
And one more point I wanted to tease out because I think it's important. Matt, you talked about AI requires huge amounts of electricity, huge amounts. People don't understand we're talking about, the equivalent of whole time. Now, some people say, well, how terrific then that we've been developing solar and wind power because we can use that. And as I understand it, it's just the opposite, because solar and wind are intermittent sources that need to be backed up with other sources. So you're paying for duplication, not for increased electric capacity. So what you need to do is, yes, use fossil fuels, but I think you'll agree with me on this. move much faster towards safe nuclear energy. Small modular reactors that have no emissions, no pollution, nothing like that. Don't worry about that, but produce huge amounts of energy. This has been impossible because of a regulatory environment in this country for a long time. Why China doesn't have it, I don't really understand. Maybe you can tell me. But that's what we're going to need, I think, if we're going to have AI and have the amount of electricity we need for all these. And energy is wealth. That's a whole other story, another conversation. But energy is wealth. You want to have electricity. You want to turn lights on, air conditioners, all that. All right, let me stop there and say, tell me if I'm wrong.
No. I look. One of the great tragedies of the environmental movement, when it really picked up in the early '70s, was that it made one of its founding tenets to be anti-nuclear power. And, the Nixon administration had plans to massively build out the fleet of nuclear, power plants in the country. And, the environmental movement always never thinks ahead to the next generation of technology. It's always about regulating what they imagine will be a static set of technologies in the world. So they said, well, look, it's not safe enough. Nuclear power. So we basically abandoned the nuclear industry, stuck with things that put more emissions of greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere. Remained for many decades dependent on Middle East oil, and then we've been noodling with these so-called renewables, but like you said, they're just not going to come close to meeting the human and industrial needs for energy. So we're picking up where we left off in the '70s with finally some investment into trying to figure out how to do nuclear more safely and reliably, and lo and behold, we did what Americans do. We fix a problem. We come up with an innovative solution. And so I think that nuclear is going to be absolutely essential to our ambitions to not be a second-rate follower technologically of really hostile dictatorships around the world.
Why hasn't China done more with nuclear? Why are they? Because they're relying on coal, because they obviously don't believe, as you say, they don't believe that global warming is a problem, and they don't even care about the quality of the air. And when I say that, coal puts particulates into the atmosphere, not just CO2. CO2, I disagree when people say it's a pollutant. It's not a pollutant. It's food for plants. It's what you and I are breathing out. You can say it has an effect on the environment or on global warming. It may. It's credible. A lot of people think so, but it's not a pollutant. It's not a pollutant. But coal does produce pollutants. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I wanted to get that in.
So I'll go. I think I'm a nuclear engineer in my former life.
Oh, right. So you probably know something about this.
Two thoughts. First, back on the U.S. Boy, Matt is spot on. In fact, Microsoft just procured the former 3 Mile Island plant to start it back up. One of the undamaged ones, to start it back up to power data centers. And so we're going to have a mix of traditional nuclear power. Traditional nuclear power, just so we understand, is about 20% of the American grid at any one time. And it's been that kind of number fairly consistently for about 20 years. And we just built our first really big nuclear power plant down in Georgia. Southern Company did and brought it online. Tom Fanning, a friend of FDD's, did that. But here's the point. You're going to have big nuclear power plants doing these big data centers, and then small modular reactors where there's other power centers, where there's smaller data centers around the country. I think that the executive order we'll see over the next week or so is going to limit. And it's a two-headed thing. One is to limit what other countries could do so they can't cross ship stuff, behind the back of export controls of China and Russia. But it's also an intent to drive U.S. data center production up, to handle this. It's not just AI. It's all the work we have to do for cryptocurrency, for mass, for artificial intelligence, and for the massive modernization, of the American infrastructure. Is all this data center coming online. It's phenomenal. And look, I don't want to use coal for it. I want to use nuclear power and LNG, which is reasonably, carbon neutral in this argument. I do want to say one thing on China. They are doing nuclear power, Cliff. I worry about it because their designs are not as intrinsically safe as U.S. designs in nuclear power, and they've dodged a bullet to date. But I don't put it past them to have their own kind of moment. I'm not going to say a Chernobyl moment, but have their own moment one day. So they are pushing it. I know they're doing coal, and I'm sure Matt can talk to this, but they're not ignoring nuclear power.
Remember that China. I just queried Claude, the Anthropic thing. And by the way, I don't. They're not a client. They're just Dario's a friend. But I like noodling with all these competing AI apps. Claude tells me that China is about 8,500 terawatt hours per year, so more than double what the United States does. So that even though China has a lower percentage of nuclear power in its total stack, they're producing, more than twice as much as the United States, and they're growing the nuclear pie to be equal to the roughly 20% of the pie that's in the United States. So that means they're going to be producing 2 or 3 times more power through nuclear plants in pretty short order here.
One other advantage I imagine we have is if you want that we can attract AI talent to come to the U.S. if we have the right legal immigration policies. My guess is China would find that much more challenging. If you are an AI scientist in, say, Bangalore, India, you probably don't want to live in Beijing. You probably want to live in maybe not California anymore, but somewhere in the U.S. Am I right about that?
Yeah. Look, we want to attract good Chinese talent, on AI. You have to have some vetting in place. There are, there's a certain percentage of people who are tasked to do things for the state. That's not most, Chinese people who come to the United States who want to, learn and build a life here. We should make it easier for people that we want coming here from China to stay here after they finish their, postdoc programs and all the rest. But you also have to have some vetting in place. But obviously our advantage in the United States is that we are that light, that beacon that attracts brilliant people from every corner of the globe. And people don't want to move to China. People are, in fact, a friend of mine, a Chinese entrepreneur, says China's greatest export right now is its talent. And their money. People are trying to get out of China right now because it is such a stifling and stagnating economy.
Hey, Cliff, you're hinting at the H-1B visa program, and 100% we need to open this up. Now, look, let's be clear. They're not getting their AI education elsewhere. They're getting their AI education in the States. The beauty of the United States is we're a great place to work, and on top of it, we're a great place to get smart. We have the best STEM, science, technology, engineering programs in the world, and that extends to AI. The frontier labs are all in the United States. We are where it's at. I mean, there's a handful of things going on externally, but we're where it's at. The most crazy thing is that a large percentage of the people who get PhDs in STEM in America are non-U.S. citizens. They're paid for by us because they also give back to the school, they teach and things like that. But they get this degree, largely on scholarships from NSF or NIH or DOD. That's fantastic. They work for us while they're doing it. But then when they're done with the degree, they have 3 lottery chances to stay in the country. And then after we've educated you, after we've worked with you, after you've got you perfectly positioned, we then say, man, you drew badly in the lottery. And while that may have been good in the late 1960s, Cliff, it's not good, in this H-1B thing. We've got to fix this, if we're going to be that shining beacon on the hill where all the smart people live.
This gets to an important point that our immigration policies should benefit American citizens and the American economy and the American military-industrial complex, so we're strong. That should be, we have a diversity lottery that's just meant to provide diversity. That sounds lovely, but that's not really the point of all this. All right, there's one more question, and then and use this as, this is my next extra question. Make any of the points you want to make, because I want to let you go in a reasonable time. But that last question is, am I right also to think that the last thing we want is for any international organization to be controlling or mediating or making the rules for any of this, because it'll end up as everything from the UN and international organization, not everything, but most things end up, which is not to the benefit of the United States.
Yeah,
Am I
look,
right?
Cliff, like the old saying goes, it's the pioneers who make the rules, not the settlers. We are at the forefront of this right now. International organizations don't even know what we're talking about half the time when we're talking about frontier AI models. We can make use of those things down the road after we've won the race, like we created, Eisenhower created an Atoms for Peace program and the IAEA, and for a while that was working well for us. In some respects, I think it's still important and it could be improved upon. But what we're talking about right now is a race, especially over the course of the Trump administration. Does President Trump want to be a president who wins the race on AI? I think so. He said as much. Does he want to put first the interests of just the companies that sell the components of AI and put them at the service of anybody in the world, or to make sure that we don't offshore our AI capability, or if we do it very carefully, only to very trusted allies? I think that would probably be President Trump's instinct. There are going to be a lot of businessmen calling him saying, "Hey, we hate these rules. We want to sell more high-end chips to anybody who wants them." But this is more like a Manhattan Project, right? You don't want to say, "Yeah, we want to export all of the components and knowledge and technology for making nuclear bombs before we've even built our own," right? And this is not just a defense set of heavy implications that are coming from AI. It's also about who's going to really dominate all of the good aspects of AI as well, and that's going to touch every single industry anyone can think of right now.
Any last thought, Monty?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to remind us the UN Cybercrime Treaty hasn't prevented any cybercrime. The World Health Organization did not help World Health around COVID. The last place I'm going right now is international support. I will say, picking up on Matt's point, the one partner in this, the one ally in this that is just a critical above all others, and one for which I hope President Trump develops a growing and deep affinity, is Taiwan. Taiwan is our partner in this. Our brains, our fabless factories and their fabs, where they actually make these microchips, are what are going to drive success in our frontier labs in AI. So Taiwan is our most trusted partner in this, and I hope that they get a big 6'4", red tide hug from Donald Trump as we go forward.
Yeah, if you remember, Cliff, it was the second quarter of 2020. The U.S. economy fell by 1/3. It contracted roughly 33% in the second quarter of 2020 because of COVID and the lockdowns. Now we bounced back and then clawed our way above where we had left off before COVID. But think of the damage and dislocation and disemployment and everything that came with that. If Taiwan is coercively annexed by China on President Trump's watch, he will have to contend with the second quarter of 2020, except it doesn't recover. It doesn't recover the following quarter. It lasts through the rest of his term in office. We will be in a depression. We will be in a Great Depression. So Taiwan is absolutely critical. They want to partner with us even more heavily. They're building good plants right now. The most cutting edge plant in Arizona. So Taiwan is the most important matter, the security of Taiwan for our economy, whether we're going to have much of an economy and not end up with a collapsed stock market.
Well, this is vital stuff. This is fascinating, edifying. Thank you so much, Monty. Thank you so much, Matt. Everybody read Matt's piece in the Wall Street Journal as well. And again, thanks for being here today. And thanks for all of you who joined us here today on Foreign Policy.